When Stanley Kubrick cast Shelley Duvall in The Shining, the choice baffled some and seemed inspired to others. Duvall had already made her name in Robert Altman's ensemble films, with her long frame, bird-like presence, and wide eyes that radiated a mix of fragility and resilience. She wasn't the obvious Hollywood idea of a horror heroine, but that was the point. Kubrick wanted realism, a woman whose exhaustion, fear, and paranoia would feel lived in rather than glamorous. From the moment she signed on, Duvall knew she wasn't stepping into a conventional role. She was stepping into a marathon. What she didn't anticipate was that her work would be overshadowed for decades, not by her own words, but by a myth. The idea that Stanley Kubrick broke her, that he traumatized her, that The Shining destroyed her life. The truth, however, is far more complicated and far more interesting than the legend. The shoot itself was infamously grueling. Kubrick was known for his perfectionism, but on The Shining, he pushed it to extremes, demanding dozens, sometimes more than 100 takes of a single scene. For Duvall, who played Wendy Torrance, the terrified wife trapped in the Overlook Hotel with her unraveling husband, this meant living in near constant distress. The baseball bat scene, where Wendy backs away from Jack Nicholson's Jack Torrance on the staircase, was performed so many times that the Guinness Book of Records later cited it as one of the most takes ever filmed for a single scene, 127. By the end, Duvall's hands were raw, her voice hoarse, her body trembling. Going through day after day of excruciating work, almost unbearable, she told Roger Ebert in 1980. Yet even in that same breath, she added, but from other points of view, really very nice, I suppose. She wasn't oblivious to the suffering, but she also wasn't painting Kubrick as a sadist. She was acknowledging that the torment was part of the process, part of the art. What outsiders interpreted as abuse, Duvall herself repeatedly reframed as collaboration. If it hadn't been for the volley of ideas and butting heads together, it wouldn't have come out as good as it did, she told Leon Vitali, Kubrick's longtime assistant, in 1979. She admitted Kubrick had a streak of cruelty in him, the kind that came out of his own experiences with harshness, but she also emphasized his warmth. He was very warm and friendly to me, she told The Hollywood Reporter in 2021. She remembered him wanting to sit with her and Nicholson for hours, talking through ideas while the crew waited impatiently. To her, that wasn't neglect. That was proof of how much he cared. She never pretended it was easy, but she consistently rejected the narrative that she had been broken.
I'm very pleased to have done it because I've learned more on that picture and strengthened myself and broadened the scale that my emotions can reach more than any other picture I've ever done. I find I really respect him and really like him, both as a person and as a director. I mean, I'm amazed.
At the end of the day, we knew that it was for the purpose of enhancing the performance. There were no grudges. Still, the rumors began almost immediately after the film's release in 1980. Stories spread that Kubrick had deliberately tormented her to elicit her performance, isolating her from the crew, criticizing her constantly, demanding she stay in a state of exhaustion. Behind-the-scenes footage released years later in documentaries seemed to confirm this image. Duvall with tears streaming down her face, Kubrick barking orders, Nicholson pacing in the background. To viewers who saw only those fragments, it was a portrait of cruelty. And when Duvall later stepped away from Hollywood and retreated into a quieter life in Texas, many connected the dots incorrectly. They assumed she had been so traumatized by Kubrick's methods that she fled the industry entirely, never recovering from the ordeal. It was a neat story, too neat. In reality, Duvall continued to work steadily after The Shining. While filming Kubrick's horror masterpiece in London, Robert Altman cast her as Olive Oyl in Popeye opposite Robin Williams. From 1982 to 1987, she narrated, hosted, and executive produced Fairy Tale Theater, a beloved children's series that attracted an all-star cast including Williams, Christopher Reeve, Carol Kane, Bernadette Peters, and even Mick Jagger. She carved out a niche as both actress and producer, showing that her career wasn't derailed by the Overlook Hotel at all. The myths of her supposed trauma grew not because she vanished, but because years later, when she did retreat from acting around 2002, people retroactively blamed it on Kubrick. Her hiatus was long, 2 decades away from the screen. From 2002 to 2022, she appeared in nothing. When she finally returned in the independent horror film The Forest Hills, she played a mother haunted by her son's nightmarish visions after a head injury. By then, the narrative around her life had hardened. People Googled, what happened to Shelley Duvall? And why did Shelley Duvall disappear? As if the answer lay buried in The Shining. In truth, her retreat was shaped by many things. The 1994 Northridge earthquake that damaged her Los Angeles home, the illness of a brother that drew her back to her native Texas and the exhaustion of fame itself. She grew tired of the scrutiny of the way Hollywood chewed people up and spat them out. Her partner since 1989, Dan Gilroy, explained it bluntly to the New York Times. "It's all over the internet. Look at her now, and you won't believe what she looks like now." Every celebrity gets that treatment. For Duvall, who had always been sensitive, that kind of spectacle was unbearable. The cruelest twist came in 2016, when she appeared on Dr. Phil. The episode, which highlighted her apparent struggles with mental health, was widely criticized as exploitative. To some, it confirmed the myth. Here was the broken woman, traumatized decades earlier by Kubrick, paraded on daytime TV for gawkers. But again, this was a distortion. Her difficulties were real, but they were not the direct result of one film shoot. Friends and fans who knew her best pushed back, insisting that it was dismissive and infantilizing to reduce her entire life to The Shining. People often claim that Shelley's life after The Shining was never the same and she was traumatized for life, but it's dismissive and infantilizing to think that from one movie, one young fan wrote on social media. We need more appreciation of her career post-Shining. And appreciation is what she deserved, because when you strip away the myth, what emerges is a portrait of an actress who embraced the difficulty of her work. Duvall admitted that the role required her to cry for 12 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, for 9 months. She admitted it was almost unbearable, but she also insisted she wouldn't trade the experience for anything. Working with lovable Stanley was a fascinating learning experience. Kubrick's estate reminded the world after her death on July 11th, 2024, quoting her own words. For her, the ordeal was not trauma, but craft. It was exhausting, yes, but it was also the performance that immortalized her. Wendy Torrance, clutching the baseball bat, sobbing as she swings at her husband, or screaming as she slams the bathroom window, is seared into cinematic history precisely because of that relentless process. Without Kubrick's perfectionism and her willingness to endure it, The Shining would not be the same film. Even her colleagues recognized that. Jack Nicholson often defended her, saying that no other actress could have delivered Wendy the way Duvall did. He pointed out that her fragility was her strength, that her unraveling on screen mirrored the unraveling of the hotel itself. Critics who initially dismissed her as shrill or hysterical later revised their judgments, praising her performance as one of the most authentic portrayals of terror ever captured on film. Time, as it often does, vindicated her. The myth of the broken actress may have been seductive, but the reality of the resilient artist was more enduring. Looking back, the fascination with Duvall's supposed trauma says more about the audience than it does about her. People wanted to believe that Kubrick was a monster, that genius demanded cruelty, that her life was a casualty of art. It made for a darker, juicier story, but it robbed Duvall of her agency, of her own repeated insistence that she embraced the process, understood it, even respected it. She admitted Kubrick had a cruel streak. She admitted she cried until she thought she couldn't anymore. But she also laughed about how important those long conversations with him were, how much she learned, how she never held grudges. To reduce her to a victim is to ignore her own testimony. And in the end, her testimony is what matters most. Shelley Duvall's story is not a tragedy about an actress destroyed by a director. It is a story about endurance, about the price of art, about how myths can overshadow reality. It is also a story about Hollywood's cruelty, not on set, but off. The industry that cheered her in the 80s was the same one that abandoned her when she aged, when she retreated, when she struggled. The gossip that insisted The Shining broke her was the same gossip that mocked her appearance years later. Through it all, she maintained that her time with Kubrick was worth it, that she wouldn't trade it, that it was, in her words, a fascinating learning experience. If we take her at her word, and we should, then the myth collapses. What remains is respect for an actress who gave everything she had to a role, who endured nearly a year of emotional exhaustion, and who created one of the most unforgettable performances in film history.